In the early morning hours of July 2023, a rusted, weathered vessel was spotted drifting aimlessly near the coast of the Philippines. It was quickly identified as the MV Horizon, a 220-foot cargo ship that had vanished without a trace in the South Pacific 2 decades earlier. The last sighting of the ship had been in 2003 during a fierce tropical storm that had caught the vessel off guard. After weeks of searching, the Horizon was presumed lost at sea, along with its 17-member crew. For the families of those aboard, it was a tragedy without closure. No wreckage was ever found, and no distress signal had been sent. When the ship reappeared, weathered but intact, it reignited international intrigue. Where had the ship been all this time? What had happened to its crew, and why now, after 20 long years, had it suddenly emerged? The Philippine Coast Guard was dispatched immediately to investigate. As they approached the vessel, eerie silence hung in the air. The ship looked frozen in time, its hull encrusted with barnacles and rust, but the rest seemingly undisturbed. The Coast Guard officers, led by Captain Miguel Santos, cautiously boarded the ship expecting to find a derelict. Instead, what they discovered was far more chilling. As they stepped onto the deck, they found no sign of life. The corridors were eerily empty, with no trace of the crew. There were no personal belongings, no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest what had happened to the men who had once worked aboard. The officers made their way to the control room, where they found the ship's logbook. The last entry was dated June 15, 2003, noting engine troubles in the middle of the storm. Yet there was no sign that the crew had prepared to abandon ship. Everything was left as if the crew had simply vanished into thin air. The deeper they explored, the more unsettling the ship became. In the galley, plates and cups still rested on the tables, as if the crew had just finished a meal. In the crew's quarters, the beds were unmade but untouched, blankets slightly disheveled, as if the crew had been there only hours before. It was as if the ship had been preserved in a moment of time, but the people who lived and worked aboard had disappeared without a trace. What baffled the investigators most was what they found in the cargo hold. The ship had been transporting standard goods, machinery, construction materials, and basic supplies when it left port in 2003. But now, hidden deep in the hold, they discovered rows of crates that weren't listed on the original manifest. Inside the crates were electronics, weapons, and other items that appeared far too modern for the era when the ship had disappeared. Some of the electronics were still in working condition, products that had been manufactured long after the ship's disappearance. How had these items ended up aboard a ship that had been lost for 20 years? Even stranger were the symbols etched into the walls of the cargo bay. At first, they appeared to be random scratches, but upon closer inspection, they resembled an unknown script, unlike any language the investigators had seen before. As word of the discovery spread, theories flourished. Some believed the ship had been hijacked at sea by pirates or smugglers, who used it for clandestine operations before abandoning it. But if that were the case, why had the ship gone unnoticed for 2 decades? And where were the bodies? Others speculated about more paranormal explanations, invoking the Bermuda Triangle or even time warps. But the most unsettling theory came from a group of maritime experts who pointed to the cargo hold's contents. They suggested the MV Horizon might have been used as part of a black market operation, trafficking illegal goods across the seas. Perhaps the ship had been deliberately abandoned once its use was over, but that still didn't explain the modern electronics or the symbols carved into the walls. As investigators continued to comb through the ship, they found more troubling evidence. One of the officers, while inspecting the engine room, discovered an old radio transmitter hidden behind a panel. It was still functional and had recently been used, but there were no records of transmissions from the Horizon during the 2 decades it was missing. Could someone have been secretly using the ship without detection? Captain Santos and his team were growing increasingly uneasy. As night fell, they decided to leave the ship and regroup. But before they could return to shore, a sudden storm rolled in. The weather, which had been calm all day, turned violent in an instant. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the wind howled as waves lashed at the side of the ship. The Coast Guard vessel, tethered to the Horizon, began to struggle against the waves. Santos ordered his men to retreat, but just as they were about to cut the line and make their way back, a loud metallic creak echoed from the depths of the ghost ship. It was as if the ship itself were groaning in pain. A strange feeling of dread washed over the crew, but before anyone could react, the storm subsided just as suddenly as it had appeared. The eerie calm that followed was enough to convince Santos and his team to return to shore and await further instructions. The MV Horizon was towed to a nearby naval base for further investigation, but to this day, the ship remains a mystery. International experts from around the world were called in to study the vessel and its cargo, but no definitive answers have been found. The origins of the modern electronics and the strange symbols remain unexplained. Theories continue to swirl, from piracy to paranormal events, but the fate of the crew, the ship's 2-decade absence, and the eerie contents of its cargo hold are questions that may never be fully answered.